Blessed be the Lord my strength, who teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight. And we are joined once again by the great Stephen Pidgeon, jumping into what we are seeing is a almost like a freeway crash or bumper cars collision in the American political system, the elections, as well as a lot of these events that are happening with the Pavel Durov Telegram shutdown and other things. Stephen, it's great to have you on. I was going to play a video on the Pavel Durov Telegram situation, and then we can jump into some other aspects. But let me hand it to you to get your opening thoughts. Go ahead, Stephen Pidgeon.
Well, Scott, as I reflect on this upcoming election, it is really quite distressing what's going on. The Democrats do not believe in a vote. They don't believe in democracy in any respect. Their idea of an election is rigging it in swing states. That's what they're calling an election. They don't care about your vote. They don't care about your opinion. What they care about is adjusting the algorithm on the voting machines and establishing their fraudulent methodology to precast a vote for someone who can't obtain 1% of the electorate in an open poll. And this is what they intend to do. So there is no intention of running a political campaign to persuade you to believe in the policies of this hard left Marxist woke clown, non-natural born citizen, illegal candidate for the presidency. There's no attempt to persuade you, to convince you for her to rally around big conventions or any of this. None of that. They don't have any momentum to go on because there's no vote that's ever been cast for her, ever. So what are they doing? They're putting 100% of their initiative, all of their capability and their skill set in rigging an election. So we don't have a question of, gee, I wonder who's going to win the election. The question is, will the voting American public be able to outdo the rig of the Democrats? That's the only question. That's the question that looms large in front of everybody. And then the question is, even if you do outdo Kamala Harris and the rigged Democrats, including the reptilian snakebite herself, Nancy Pelosi, even if you can outthink them and outdo their gerrymandering and their rigging of the election, well, then you're going to end up with Donald Trump. What's he going to bring to the table? One of the things he's going to bring to the table is a lot of his naivete is going to come to an end when he realizes he doesn't have the economies of scale he had in 2016. Because he let the election slip out of his hands in 2020, we've had 4 years of ruin. And now that the Obama minions have waged war on the United States successfully for now 12 years with an interrupted sequence in there, well, we're down to nothing. And so now the future does not bode well. But a couple of things I want to talk about tonight, Scott. One is I know we want to talk about the Durov distraction a bit, because of course we run a lot of Telegram channels ourselves,
Yeah.
And I run content on Telegram, daily. And so as a consequence, I've always appreciated Telegram because I've never been put in a Telegram jail. I've never had my profile sold to Cambridge Analytical. I've never had somebody threaten me like has happened to me on Facebook. Oh, we had to take down your post. Oh, we find your post offensive. Oh, your post has been fact-checked by some Democrat minion and has been determined to not be factual, while Mark Zuckerberg directly spends $400 million to directly interfere in the 2020 election, admittedly, and has admitted that he's done the same, and is censoring my speech on his platform. Well, it's not his platform anyway. It's a CIA self-reporting site. Anybody with any brain knows that's what Facebook is. It's a CIA self-reporting site. And so, I appreciated Telegram in the respect that Telegram offered uncensored platforms. There are some things that, you could see, well, this violated community standards and got bumped off. And I don't know if that's pornography or if it's some other kind of criminal activity. But I do see on a regular basis, if you're talking about somebody who can report from a Telegram user's perspective, I see on a regular basis that not everything gets through on Telegram. I don't get hammered by I don't get hammered by pornography like I used to get on Facebook.
Right.
Constantly being solicited by pornography. I don't get, the only thing that I get solicited by that I don't prefer is there's bots that bother me with Bitcoin solicitation. And there's been algorithms and I think bots that have been put together to solicit Bitcoin or other, cryptocurrency investment strategies. And I routinely block those off of any of my Telegram channels. So I find the platform to be particularly lawful and a very wide open platform. Tucker Carlson has got his platform there on Telegram. You've got a spot on Telegram. There are other people who have a pretty strong presence on Telegram. Trump's got a huge presence on Telegram. RFK's got a presence on Telegram. And of course, once they arrested Durov, his platform went up 4% in France alone, right? Everybody's trying to get on Telegram, right? So anyway, we'll talk about the nuances of that. But the main thing is that the Durov arrest was a distraction for the complete and abysmal performance of Emmanuel Macron in Ukraine.
Yeah.
This warmongering, loudmouth, idiot, he's a pathetic, cheating, fraudulent leader married to a man.
Yeah.
And, married to not just a man, but a pedophile predator that was preying on him as a child.
Yes.
And, so here he is, and he's coming out and he's saying, well, we're going to cause the Ukrainians to attack Russia. That's a great idea. Like the idea of putting, Renault tanks in Ukraine was a great idea. Yeah, that too flopped. But everything Macron has tried is like, well, here's the hair of the dog that used to belong to Napoleon before Napoleon had 600,000 troops destroyed by the Russians. Let's do it with 6,000 troops and see how it goes. And so they had their heads handed to them in Kursk. And I mean, that's what's happened. They've been beheaded in Kursk. And it's all their strategic reserve that have been beheaded. And now, well, we better drum up the world's biggest distraction real quick, because otherwise the whole world is going to see that the Ukrainian army is in a panicked retreat as we speak. The latest reports I've seen coming out of Ukraine is the Russian army is saying, we cannot report fast enough how many villages are falling into Russian army hands. Flags are going up everywhere over all the key spots. The Ukrainian army, as I predicted yesterday, the Ukrainian army is in a panicked retreat, trying to keep from getting encircled in their retreats so that they can get to the western side of the Dnieper River. And even if they get to the western side of the Dnieper River, they're going to experience, in my opinion, in the next 3 or 4 days, you're going to see a 30 to 40% defection rate out of the Ukrainian military. Those guys are going to be running across Romanian borders. They're going to be getting anywhere and everywhere that they possibly can away from their particular unit, because their units now are in full-fledged panic retreat. And this is, as long as we talk about Pavel Durov, we don't have to talk about this, right? We don't have to talk about what's happening in Ukraine, a complete defeat. The other thing I want to talk about, of course, is the status in Israel and how they both Hezbollah and Israel kind of came to a, let's call it an silent but deadly conclusion to their escalation. And even with that SBD that has happened, it still has not stopped Israel from bombing, parts of Gaza and continuing to kill civilians, and also executing civilians in the West Bank. There was an ongoing attack in the town of Jenin last night. So, we're seeing some things that are still, the war crimes are still continuing in Israel. What's the world doing about it? Of course, we have to mention Joe Biden's vacation, which, as you know, started on January 21st, 2021, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and of course, the difficulty is, and no American media is asking the question, and nobody with a critical eye is asking the question, who's running the joint? Who is running the executive branch of the U.S. government? Americans have the right to know. And if what you're telling me is that there is no elected official making decisions inside the White House, that is a coup d'etat by definition. It's a coup d'etat. So maybe it's a silent coup, maybe it's a quiet coup, but either way, it's a coup, and it is a coup that is outside of response. Now, this is what you might call a coup of first impression, right? It's a coup of first impression. Why? Well, because when else have we had the 25th Amendment? Maybe Woodrow Wilson, we had a 25th Amendment opportunity. But here we've had a 25th Amendment duty that's been on the table for at least 2 years. Since
Yes.
Biden became, since he became incontinent and incompetent, he was mentally incompetent. He was mentally incompetent to run 2 years ago when he couldn't finish a sentence, when he couldn't find his way off stage, when, his wife had to come out there and help him at every major event. This is mental incompetence, and it's practical political incompetence. Irrespective of what he thinks in his own mind, he's not competent to be the president of the United States. He's not competent to be the man on on the nuclear football. Not competent to be there. And yet, Biden has hung in there because all these people who have been engaging in decision making on his behalf have been engaged in a coup d'etat. It's a quiet coup, but it's a 25th Amendment coup. And so it's a coup of first impression. Are they engaged in acts of treason? Well, they are, in the fact that they have not reported to the American public that he is mentally incompetent. They had a duty to do so. They haven't done so because it allows them to make the decisions with no feedback, with no pushback. And so this indicts really all of the leadership inside the executive branch that has been
Yes.
making decisions on their own. And so as a consequence, I don't know how that's going to play out in the future. But you can see that the decision-making process, and I think Nancy Pelosi's got a big hand in this. She's clearly the wicked reptile of the West who's making all these decisions in the background. We need to be reptilian and cold-blooded. Well, what do you have to do, Nancy? For you to be reptilian and cold-blooded, it's going to require you to have a warm drink. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Her husband once told her, "Hey, here's my beer. Put this between your legs and keep it cold."
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the reptilian lizard is the one who created, who committed treason, in my opinion, by
Yes.
certifying Barack Obama as being a natural born citizen when he was. And of course, the media has now come out and produced facts on this that he was an MI6 agent at the time, right? He was an MI6 agent. Of course, he was a CIA agent, but he was also working with MI6. And he was arrested in 2006 in Moscow when he traveled to Russia with Senator Richard Lugar on suspicion of being an MI6 agent, not a CIA agent or somebody surreptitious for the United States, because he wasn't traveling on an American passport. An American senator not traveling on an American passport. Why not? Because he had a British passport, and even his British passport was fraudulent. He got his British passport by claiming to be a Kenyan native. And under the 1981 British Immigration Act, if you were a Kenyan native and that you were a Kenyan native, because we have to remember, Kenya did not become Kenya until 1964. Before that, it was British East Africa. So if you were born to a Kenyan citizen before 1964, you had the right to claim British citizenship.
Yes.
So Barry Soetoro, who at that time was an Indonesian citizen who had applied to Occidental as a foreign student, who had not bothered to sign up for the draft because he was a foreign student, didn't believe he would ever have anything to do with America, gets recruited by the CIA in 1980, but he picks up a British passport under the 1981 British Immigration Act, claiming that he's a Kenyan national. These were his words saying he was born in Kenya, not my words. He said he was born in Nairobi, Kenya. He claimed he's the son of Barack Obama, born in Kenya, right? He claimed that. But he claimed it for 17 years. Of course, he had to. He had a British passport, and that was the story that he told to get that British passport. But he was not born in Kenya. He was born in New York City. That's where he was born. And he won't prove that, because if he proves it, then we'll find out who his true mother is and who his true father is. And of course, if he proves it, then he's also going to have to dig up the affidavit that he signed saying that Bari Malik Shabazz, his birth name, actually died in 1992. Well, that might raise a lot of issues, like who's Big Mike, for instance. That's another question. Who are the two kids you claim were your kids when you were in the White House? I mean, these are all questions that kind of surface, right? That surface through this. But you had Nancy Pelosi sign off on an MI6 agent saying that he was qualified to be the president of the United States. This lizard did that. And so how much of this lizard is making the decision inside the White House today, right? How many of these decisions is she making? How many decisions is Obama making? How many decisions is Chuck Schumer making? These are questions. We know who was in on the Zoom meetings that were talking about staging the January 6th event.
Yep.
That included Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
Yep.
They were both present in those Zoom meetings. We know
Yep.
that, and
Yep.
multiple times, right?
Yep.
So you can see that with this going on, then they think that they can just come in and say, well, we're not going to have any kind of floor nomination process. When Joe Biden said, okay, I'm incompetent. I'm not going to be able to, run for the Democratic nomination because I'm too old and I need to go home and, and find another box of Depends. But the truth is that when that happened, the platform should have been opened.
Yes.
It should have been open for Democratic candidates, and all of these people who participate in the democratic process in the Democratic Party would have a
Yeah.
chance to voice their opinion. And guess what? You know why they didn't do that?
Well, that's a remarkable mystery question, the $64,000 question of the day, because if you were really, and let's just say for the sake of argument, the Democrats had any degree of honor and transparency, and if they wanted to have someone of caliber and substance, I'll tell you, Gavin Newsom is the slickest speaker, the most manipulative, charming guy in the Democrat arsenal, and they could have run him, and very well he could persuade the American public, because the media would have been on his side, and he would have made California look like a gilded rose. But they didn't do that. They've instead taken Kamala Harris, and it's a mystery. And I've said there's going to be bloodshed, there's going to be assassinations, there's going to be musical chairs games playing. I don't know exactly how or why or what, but I predict, because I feel it in my gut, and it seems to match the political strategy of chaos. They can't allow a free and fair election. They have to create some kind of an emergency, either killing her or killing someone, or engaging in some assassinations to shoehorn her in. But I don't think we're going to have a normal election. But I'll put it to you: what is the reason that they have allowed this completely babbling, cackling, dumb as a bag of rocks moron who no one likes, and no one, in the voting community, I think, who has a brain would have voted for her? Why do they have her in there?
Well, there's a number of reasons. No, but let's talk about the negatives first. There were three people whose names could not come up on the Democratic roster at all. Sanders, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard. Those three
Yeah.
could not appear because Sanders was going to win the nomination last time, and they had to completely overthrow it and cheat, which is what they do. I mean, Democrats do not believe in voting. They don't believe in democracy. They believe in cheating. They believe in
Yeah.
communism. They believe the ends justify the means, and power at any expense, and kill whoever you needed to kill it to get them out of the way so that you can do that. There's no democracy in a Democrat, period. Right? Like they used to say in Russia, ni pravda sa pravda. There's no truth in pravda.
Right.
There's no democracy in a Democrat, period. None. It doesn't exist at any level. So they couldn't allow RFK Jr., who I think would have absolutely swept to power. I think he would have swept like a mass movement inside the Democrats. Because, of course, Democrats, they might as well have, take down the picture of the Virgin Mary and put up, John F. Kennedy, right? In fact, I would venture that there's many homes, Democrat homes, that have pictures of John F. Kennedy in their home.
Certainly.
And, RFK Jr. comes along, he would have been a god from the Kennedy family. And they would have, there's a chance that he would have swept that entire nomination, especially from somebody who couldn't draw a crowd at a municipal utilities facility, Joe Biden, who couldn't draw a crowd in a kid's playground.
Yeah.
RFK would have absolutely swept him. And if he'd have come on with a ticket with an RFK Tulsi Gabbard ticket, it would have been absolutely game over, right?
Yeah.
And he would have been very, very viable. But when you look at Kamala Harris, when you look at Kamala Anoush, you can see that BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, they have a vested interest in pushing forward trans people. They want to push forward trans people, whether it's a trans person in France, a trans person in Britain, a trans person in America. They want to push forward a trans person and a trans agenda. And the reason they do that is because they have to soften the ground sociologically in order to create the ground in the digital world, because they're focusing on taking all of mankind to a transhuman future where you're going to be chipped. You're going to be basically an absolute peon slave serf that's got a chip in your mind. And all you are is the flesh providing the service for the computer that's doing the work. And this is what they have in mind. This is where they want to go. I mean, this is why if you look at an AI simulation that says, what's the ultimate fate of a human being? They have you at the ultimate fate is in a microchip. Your consciousness ends up in a microchip. End of story. But they need the flesh. They need the flesh to further their agenda. And so they're trying to push into a transhuman future. I mean, this is what the inoculation is all about. Putting in nanobots, and these nanobots are self-forming antennas that then creates you as an antenna for a digital cell phone transmission system that is very line of sight dependent. It's very shortwave frequencies. They have to have antennas everywhere. Well, if everybody's an antenna, guess what? You're the cell tower. You're the walking cell tower. And so the agenda that comes, so the favorite agenda coming out of the corporatocracy that runs the country, that corporatocracy, sponsored by Rat Fink and Jamie Dimon, these guys are turning around and say, look, we want this trans future. We want all this stuff to be trans softening. This is why anybody what idiot would say, let's put a trans individual on a Bud Light beer can? Let's put a trans individual on a Harley Davidson. Really? Now, I can tell you, in my opinion, Scott, since I'm being blunt with you today on our channel, in my opinion, that's stock manipulation.
Yes, I was just going to say that. You're right.
They force the company to do a trans thing like that, absolutely kills the company. And then these three corporatocracies sweep up the stock for next to nothing. And then they put out a new beer, or they put out a new motorcycle, whatever it is they're going to do. And so Harley Davidson has been raped. Bud Light. I mean, like, let me give you an example. If I were Anheuser the third, he came in and fired the whole marketing department the day after that thing hit, right? That thing hit, their stock went to nothing. They couldn't give away beer at any price. Like Bud Light's a beer, right? It really isn't a beer, right? It's some foamy water somewhere. It's one of the worst beers I've ever tasted. But anyway.
Yeah.
But when Anheuser the third came in and fired the whole marketing staff, all they had to do was the following day change the paint to red and white with a little bit of blue lettering, call the beer A3, and boom, you've recaptured the market just like that. It recaptured the market just like that. In fact, they'd have shot right to the top of the market. But instead, they hang out with not able to give the beer away. Now, the Harley riders are like setting their Harleys on fire. It's like, hey, how much are we giving for this Harley so I can buy an Indian?
Yes.
And so this was another death knell that was brought on by some bought off HR department that was owned by who the corporate stockholders are who? Who owns 50+% of Harley? Guess who? Well, you're going to do what we say. We're going to replace the whole board. So go DEI. Go DEI. And the whole point of the DEI, again, we have to look at this slippery slope for what it is. Okay? When they came out and said, we want domestic partnerships for same-sex couples, that wasn't what it was about at all. What it was about was killing whatever property interest you had in your marriage and opening the door for a slippery slope that slid down human feces face down into an absolute plot of pig feces at the bottom that's littered with pedophilia, child predation, childhood rape, human organ trafficking, child trafficking, sex trafficking, blah, 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 on and on and on it goes. That and child sacrifice in the public square. That's the bottom of the slide. So did they want domestic partnerships? And let me tell you what the demand was for same-sex marriage, Scott. California had it shoved down its throat by a judge in a black robe.
Right.
Right? Proposition 18 said, we don't want it. 56% of the Californians said, we don't want it. 55% of Oregonians said, we don't want it. But a judge in a black robe, well, you're getting it whether you want it or not, because we find it to be discrimination. What's the big demand that we're trying to satisfy? Who are all these people knocking at the castle gate with their pitchforks and their torches and their shovels saying, we need same-sex marriage? How many people got married? That's the question. It's a factual,
Very
empirical.
few. Yeah, yeah. It's worthless, meaningless.
Let's
They
talk about how few. It's the same statistic in every jurisdiction that's ever legalized same-sex marriage. It's 15 thousandths of 1%.
yeah. Because and let me just deviate quickly. When I was at Heritage Foundation and I was doing my doctorate, my dissertation originally was in social science findings, and we put together a database from all over the world, from all the think tanks and universities that were studying family, marriage, sexuality, essentially looking the two paths: sexuality within the confines of marriage and family and tradition and religious participation and a healthy society versus homosexuality, lesbianism, promiscuity, pornography, divorce, and everything else. And you see very clearly one decadent, dying, diseased, filthy, insane society versus a wholesome, nurturing, strong, intelligent, productive, and you've talked about this too, society. And ironically, it's what you see in places like Russia and Iran and China to an extent. They don't have these aberrations of sexual dysfunctionality, but the homosexual is always about promiscuity, always about promiscuity, multiple partners. You look at the data, and there's always multiple partners, promiscuity, and all sorts of disease and substance abuse and trauma. And it always starts with them being preyed upon. It is not a glamorous choice sort of lifestyle or some, well, there's just a genetic proclivity and I just find men more attractive or something. No, it always originates in trauma and predation and depression and all sorts of other issues. But promiscuity and multiple partners is their philosophy. Sex, in a sense, uh, sexual activity becomes a very obsessive cult-like worship. That's why they, work so hard and dress in the nice clothes and are almost obsessed with their physicality and bodies and all that. And it is a cult of self-idolatry and self-worship and a sexual sadomasochistic sort of flavors of that. But there is no wholesome desire for a little stone cottage on Peoria Lane where two men knit sweaters together and just, live a nice, happy life. It's not what it's all about at all. And women are particularly stupid when it comes to that because that's what they fantasize. Oh, let's just let these men be themselves. No, all of that is a lie, and the reality is something far sicker, far more abusive, far more angry and dysfunctional. And homosexuals have the highest degree of domestic violence and suicide, and it's because they're being enabled in their it's almost like people who cut themselves. I have a right to cut myself, and if you say I don't have a right to cut myself, you're anti-cutter or you're cutophobic or something. No, we want to stop you from hurting yourself, and that hurt, it will lead to your demise, your death, your suffering. And that's how homosexuality should be treated, as a hurt that needs to be healed, not something encouraged. But go ahead.
Well, the DSM-3, it reflected just that. That's exactly what the DSM-3 concluded when it was, determined that homosexuality as well as transgenderism were a psychological dysfunction that required treatment and to be addressed in that respect. But what you're seeing now is you're seeing really a hypersexual narcissism.
Yes.
Is what it becomes. And, and the fact is that people in the homosexual community have a need to have sex with everybody else that's in the homosexual community.
Yes.
That's why one disease everybody else has. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So at any rate, but the homosexual community is really, that was a slippery slope. It was destined to take us to the next level of predation. It was destined to do it. The only thing that keeps you off that slippery slope is by binding that behavior out of bounds. If
Yes.
you're firm and you're drawing the line of, you're drawing the circle of behavior that is inside the circle, homosexuality must necessarily be drawn outside the circle. This is what scripture tells us. It's outside the circle. It's not inside the circle of behavior. It's outside the circle. And it needs to be kept that way, because once you move the circle to include it, well, then you're immediately on that slippery slope. And that slippery slope, the very same day same-sex marriage was adopted in Washington by supposedly a free vote. Ha ha ha! Right? Like there's been a fair vote in Washington since 2004. There hasn't been. But at any rate, when it was adopted in Washington by a so-called vote, the very same day, in the very same bill, which, by the way, they had more than two subjects in that bill, making it unconstitutional. But did the Supreme Court find that? No, the Supreme Court only finds that with initiatives that are done by the people, not by initiatives that are done by the Senate. Anyway, they had a non-discrimination passage in there that says you cannot discriminate against people on the basis of their quote unquote sexual orientation. And then Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a atheist hyper-Talmudist, comes out and defines and says, oh yeah, well, there's at least 8 genders beyond LGBTQ. At least 8 genders, at least 8 sexual orientations beyond LGBTQ. Really? Okay. So this immediately, the instant that the same-sex marriage became law in Washington, it also became illegal to tell a guy, hey, listen, you can't slip on a dress and go into the women's bathroom. And then it became, well, I don't even have to slip on a dress. All I have to do is tell you I self-identify as a woman, and I get to go into the girls' locker room at the YWCA. I get to go into the women's bathroom and at the sports arenas. I get to go into the women's bathroom at work. I get to do all you, and you can't say a thing about it, because if you do, you're discriminating against me. You're creating a hostile work environment for me, right? And so that came in the same day that same-sex marriage became legal, that became the law as well. And so a florist in the Tri-Cities said, well, I'm not going to sell flowers to you two homosexuals that I sell flowers to all the time. If you get married, I'm not going to provide the flowers for your marriage. They hadn't got married. She hadn't said no. They hadn't got married. The attorney general came in there and hit her with a lawsuit that at the end cost her $840,000 in attorney's fees. Since then, the Supreme Court has taken up other cases like that and said she had a constitutionally protected right to refuse service to them.
That's right.
Did little Bob Ferguson give the $840,000 back? No. Did he apologize? No. He didn't do any of that stuff. Nope. No chance. So you can see that has slid right into, well, look, you can't discriminate against somebody who's a pedophile just because they have a, what do they call it? Minor attraction, or I don't know, youth attraction or something. Attracted to underage people. I don't know what they call it. They have some name for it.
Yeah.
You can't discriminate against them. And then the push is, of course, that children should be able to consent. Well, look what the push is in California. A 7-year-old can consent to have his genitals surgically removed. And you can't object. If you do, we're going to take your child from you, right? A 10-year-old girl, if she gets pregnant, she has the right to elect an abortion without your knowledge. And what about vaccines? Can your kids take vaccines in elementary school without notifying you, without your consent? Yeah, so the whole idea is to preempt parental consent. You can't say no if the child wants to cut their genitals off. You can't say no if the child wants to have an abortion. And you can't say no if the child wants to get into a sexual relationship with an adult. Okay? That's what this whole thing is about. Okay, well, that's not the only thing. How about marrying computers? How about marrying robots? How about marrying buildings? How about marrying animals, right? All of these things. And then, of course, we haven't talked about polyamory, polygamy, these kinds of things that are coming in as well.
Pandora's box.
But you don't know you're at the bottom. You can't look to the sexual proclivity and say we've reached the bottom, because what's at the bottom is child sacrifice in the public square. That's the bottom. That's the bottom. When you're sacrificing infants in the public square, that's the bottom. Okay. The only thing that follows that is you engaging in cannibalism because there's no food left to eat. That's the only thing that follows that particular act. And we are very, very close to that theater. Now, when we talk about that theater came to Jerusalem during the reign of Zedekiah, an arrogant punk. He was in his 20s, I think, when he was running Jerusalem, early 30s. Anyway, he didn't know what he was doing. And he thought, well, this Nebuchadnezzar, this guy's got a big army, he's pretty tough. But if I go to NATO and I get them to supply me and back me, I can go to war with those guys and I don't have to pay them taxes anymore. So he went to Ptolemy, he went to the king, he went to the Pharaoh. Hey, you got a big army, back me against the Babylonians. Ptolemy's like, yeah, okay, until, Zedekiah is like, in Nebuchadnezzar's eyes, you're not getting any more money from us. Nope, not you. And so the next thing you know, you got this siege going on in Jerusalem. And the siege is horrendous and horrific. And in 593 BC, they breached the walls. And at one point, Zedekiah, his name begins with a Z, kind of like a certain Zelensky we happen to know. Zedekiah is standing in Jerusalem, and he looks, and the 5 top Babylonian generals are sitting right there in downtown Jerusalem, staring at him. The 5 top generals. Then they pack it up, walk out, they leave. And the next thing you know, the siege goes on, and there's no food, and there's no food, and there's no food, and there's no water, and there's no food, and there's no water. And then a woman comes up to him and says, King, you got to help me. He says, what? She said, well, I met this other woman, and we agreed that we were going to kill my son and eat him. And then when he was gone, we'd kill her son and eat him. But after we killed my son and ate him, she ran off, and I can't find her. Only then did Zedekiah realize that the curse of Deuteronomy 28 was completed and in full bloom in his little enclave. And when he realized that, he packed up his 7 sons, got on the horses, and fled out of Hezekiah's tunnel, trying to make a break for Jericho. He was caught. All 7 of his sons were killed in front of his eyes, and then his eyes were gouged out and taken back and hanged in Babylon. Okay. This curse is no joke. It's no joke. And here in America, we're at a point right now, and I want to make this point while we're talking about this proclivity. When you look at homosexuality in scripture, Moshe says this is an abomination. And then if you look at the law of Moshe, he says that people who practice this are subject to the death penalty. But Yah has something entirely different to say about the matter. He says, as a nation, if you codify this behavior, I will vomit you out of the land I have given you.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about the countries in Europe that have approved same-sex marriage. Belgium, 58% now immigrants from other countries. The Netherlands, 53% immigrants from other countries. Britain, look what's going on in Britain. The Muslims have full authority to the point that they can go out and carve up little kids, and you don't get to object. You can keep your mouth shut or go to prison. Right? With no bail.
Yeah.
And so what is happening in Britain is the same thing happening in France, same thing happening in Belgium, same thing happening in the Netherlands, same thing happening in Germany, same thing happening in Denmark, same thing happening in Sweden. They are being vomited out of their own land. Now, if you don't want to be vomited out of the land, well, then you need to restore yourself to righteousness. So the answer is not going out and rioting or petitioning or putting up a report on CIA Facebook. Instead, what you do is you start lobbying to recreate a property interest in your marriage. And you start teaching your children that there are 2 sexes and you need to marry the opposite sex. And you need to get married and stay married and pay attention to what you're doing and fight for your marriage like William Wallace. This is what has to happen. And so when this happens, it's going to take 3 generations before you recapture your country. But we're in the 3rd generation of adultery right now, right? Adultery came in spades in 1962.
Yes.
And when adultery came in 1962, this adultery caused an adulterous nation. Then the so-called Cultural Revolution was led by who? 2 presidents that were notorious adulterers. right? JFK and LBJ,
Yeah.
notorious adulterers, huge
Yeah.
reputations for being adulterers. They were the leaders of the counterculture and the free sex movement. Those two led it. Now, when you talk about Richard Nixon, there was no scandal of Richard Nixon with Tricia, him having outside affairs. There wasn't anything with Jerry Ford. There wasn't anything with Jimmy Carter, him and Rosalind. There wasn't anything with Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan. There wasn't even anything with H.W. Bush and Barbara Bush.
Mhm.
Put another Democrat in office,
Yeah.
and you got hyper womanizer, super slut, Bill Clinton,
Yeah.
who is not only a sexual predator and a womanizer, but also had been accused of forcible rape by at least 4 women.
Yep.
And once you enter that, we've entered into the second generation with Bill Clinton. We entered into the second generation of moral depravity. And once again, he was the one that said, oh, well, oral sex is not sex, according to my definition. So I can get on TV and say I never had sex with that woman because there was never any coitus.
Mhm.
So half the high school population in the country said, oh yeah, that's not sex.
Mhm.
Well, guess what? We introduced a new level of adulterous and fornicated behavior into the culture.
Mhm.
And then you get to the third generation, where you have a president who comes in married to a man trying to claim he's a woman with fake kids and killing anybody who says that it's actually Michael Levon Robinson, who played for the Oregon Ducks, had 83 tackles and 7 sacks, and to this day can still military press 180 pounds over his head.
Mhm.
Oh,
Mhm.
nobody can say that. Oh, no, you can't talk about that. Well, the fact is that non-natural born citizen couldn't prove his American citizenship. MI6 agent holding the office of president at the hands of the lizard, Nancy Pelosi, brought us into the third generation of depravity. So we only get 3 generations. At the end of the third generation, the society is totally destroyed. We go from being the head to being the tail. We go from being the creditor to being the debtor. And now, by the end of this year, we'll be $38 trillion in debt. How much evidence do you need? How much evidence do you need?
Yeah.
This society is plummeting and crashing and burning.
Yeah.
And because that is going on, the cure is, of course, to reform our families, strengthen our marriage, demand that your local jurisdiction respect your property interest and your due process interest in
Yes.
your marriage.
Yes.
And you cannot divorce me on a no fault basis. If you're going to take my property from me, which you have no property interest greater than your marriage.
Yeah. And let me just augment that, Stephen. It sounds like what I've heard before too is the proper administration of a marriage, the proper recognition and establishment of a marriage between a man and a woman. As I've had older relative friends of mine say, in the old days, you just wrote the names of the husband and wife in the family Bible, and this is the date. You do not have it managed, established, recognized, licensed, regulated, or in any way part of the state or the government's operation. They don't have the right to have their fingers in your marriage. It is a spiritual, personal contract, family, community, social contract, whatever you want to say. But the government, the county, the county recorder, whoever it is, there's different agencies, they make money from this. They don't have a right and shouldn't be involved in any recognition or place in these marriages. Is that a sound judgment?
Yes, that's an accurate statement. First of all, there is plenty of case law out there, all the way up into In re Troxel, which was a 2002 case. And in that decision, it is written in the majority decision that there is one of the most prized rights you have under the Constitution is the right to marry. Well, you can't license something you have a right to do.
There you go.
The only thing you can license is something you've criminalized.
Yes.
So what these states do is they criminalize any marriage other than a licensed marriage. Then you have to get a license. And the license is your contractual agreement with the government that the government has the right to divorce you on terms sufficient to the government, which is no fault. And once you've done this, the government has the right to say, oh, well, we're just going to go ahead and redistribute your wealth. I can't begin to tell you the abuses I have seen in family court. I mean, I'll just give you some of the surface, right? In the state of Washington, the Supreme Court, which is, essentially 5 witches and 4 geldings, they got together and said, look, rules of evidence don't apply in a family law matter. Rules of evidence don't apply. You know why the rules of evidence were adopted? To eliminate stuff that was notoriously false, like hearsay and undocumented evidence and stuff that was unreliable. That stuff it's over a 500-year period. That stuff was found unreliable and did not carry an indicia of truth to warrant its admission as evidence. That's what the rules of evidence are about. Oh, well, we're suspending those. We can admit anything we want. Any hearsay statement, any far-flung lie, any line of BS. Hey, you want to bring in 5 pounds of steaming cow manure and lay it up and say, here's evidence, Your Honor. I'll admit that. It's got no probative value whatsoever, but I want to have the smell of that in the courtroom. Yeah, there you go. Why not? And then they go on. Look, I saw, here, I'll just give you the example of how bad it is. The courts for a while used to enter an immediate restraining order upon the petition for a divorce or petition for whatever. If somebody came in and said, I'm going to file for divorce, the court would issue an immediate restraining order saying, okay, you can't spend any money that is outside the norm, outside your regular bills. You can pay your rent, you can pay your mortgage, you can pay your car payment, you can pay you can buy food, but you can't go on a spending spree. You can't do this. You can't empty a bank account. You can't buy a Mona Lisa, right? And so they had entered this case. All right. So here I am in the courtroom. It's 2 weeks later. 9 o'clock in the morning, the judge comes in and she's so completely loaded on vodka, she can hardly see straight. She's slurring, she's drunk, just drunk off her butt. 9 a.m. in the morning. She sits down at the bench, and the first case is about this Microsoft guy who's making great money. And his wife decided that she was going to file for divorce. So they had one of these restraining orders on there, right? So what's the testimony? Well, Your Honor, in the last 2 weeks, she spent $120,000 on the credit cards and dropped $60,000 on a party. You know what the judge's reaction was? Oh, well, she obviously is not getting enough temporary spousal maintenance. So I'm going to up her spousal maintenance to $5,800 a month. So she's got some more pocket money. That's what the judge's response was. Okay. This is the kind of stuff that you get in these family courts. Okay. They are completely corrupted. They're totally unlawful. There's nothing about the law that goes on in family court. There's nothing. It's just a communist redistribution of wealth scheme that goes on from a bunch of Politburo arch hyper-feminist Nazis. That's what's going on. Okay. So when you talk about, so the state has no right to license your marriage at all. They can't license it. You have a constitutional right to a marriage, to be married. They can't license that which you have a right to. But that doesn't stop these corporations standing in the place of the government that you used to have in your state from causing you to gain a license and then controlling every bit of, oh, well, only this judge can actually marry you, right? Not that priest, because the judge is superior to the priest. Everybody knows that. And only in a secular atheistic world of God haters and Satan lovers is that the case. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a true marriage, when the idea of registering it in the family Bible, that was one way. But the true practice, really, if you want to know the truth of it, during so much of the Dark Ages, for instance, was the giving of rings. Mm-hmm. The man would give a woman a ring, the woman would give the man a ring, and as long as they had the ring on, you were married. If your spouse showed up without the ring on, well, they're trying to tell you something, because they could just say, what ring? Mm-hmm. We're married. What ring? What are you talking about? Right? But you would see that there was a crafting, and the maintenance of records was done in the church registry. Your baptism record, your birth record, your marriage record, and and your death record. All of those be maintained in the church to some degree, right? Even though the Catholic Church in Ireland was banned from maintaining records of that sort from 1534 until 1837. Mm-hmm. So Catholics born in Ireland had no record of anything, because it was illegal to keep any record, keep any birth certificate, any baptism certificate, any marriage certificate, any death certificate. illegal. You could have a headstone, but you couldn't have anything in the registry. Illegal. It wasn't until the Emancipation Act of 1837. So you can see that the state sticks its nose where it doesn't belong all the time, thinking it has the authority to license constitutional rights. You know, if you want to speak freely on Telegram, you can come down here and apply for a license. And after 90 days of review, and maybe you publishing a 50-page document with an attorney's opinion on the end of it, we'll give you a license to speak in public, right? This is what they're doing, right? And so, yeah, this is a great offense when you're talking about marriage. So in terms of, so one thing that people can do, and they can do this very non-publicly really, is you stop doing licensed marriages. Stop doing it, period. When you decide to get married, you get married in a covenant marriage. And I mean, I got to tell you, Scott, between me and you, I've done a number of covenant marriages, people who have been in licensed marriages, and they don't feel like their marriage has been covenanted. And so we do a covenant marriage, and a covenant marriage is by far a better way to go. Now, the difficulty with this is that when you say you're trying to legitimize the children, right? When you're trying to legitimize the children, and again, this is a matter of statutory construction, because in some states they prohibit you from putting the name of the father on the birth certificate if there's not a licensed marriage between the mother and the father. They prohibit you from doing so, right? And so, you know, you're going to have to move outside the birth certificate. But I have to warn you, if you move outside the birth certificate and you have children at home, say using a midwife, and you're not using a birth certificate, CPS sees that as an opportunity to traffic your child because there's no certificate. So that child doesn't exist as a matter of state law. So they can sell that child. They can come over and seize the child from you and then sell that child to another couple who can then create whatever birth certificate they want to create. That goes on all the time.
Yeah.
So, you know, so when you talk about this, you do want to create a birth certificate. So to this degree, we have been talking about, in our circle, we've been talking about creating a work that has death certificates, marriage certificates, birth certificates that you maintain on your own register. And you can do these things that will have the force of law. For instance, if you take a birth certificate and you have it, the birth certificate, of course, has to be signed by the parents and has to be signed by two witnesses. And it needs to, but if you have two witnesses' signatures on these certificates, they're going to be binding. And if you want to make them even more binding, well, you can have two witnesses sign in front of a notary and then get an apostille. And so the certificate is recognized all the way around the world as being a notarized certificate, right? And it's not a state issued certificate, but you do have a registry of the birth. You have a registry of the birth that prevents CPS or somebody else from trafficking your child. And so these things, I'm glad we raised these issues. I'm glad you raised these issues, Scott, because they are incredibly important issues.
Well, it seems like we're going in a direction where the state is imploding into madness because of the curse that God has put upon it because of its rebellion against God and its immorality, its Sodom and Gomorrah, proclivities and laws. It is codified, as you said, every form of evil and debauchery and perversion and rebellion. And God is turning the nation over to wickedness more and more and more. In absence of a spiritual reformation, a spiritual revival, a Nineveh humility, a Nineveh humiliation, if you will, and sackcloth and ashes, short of that, there will be no restoration of the country. It will only continue to break up and descend. Now, the pockets of believers, the pockets of human beings that worship God and are His people, will remain in the land. They won't all suddenly disappear and be transported to Russia or to Canada or wherever else. They'll still be in the United States, in the continental America. But these portions of human beings have to have their own instrumentalities to live, their own certificates, if you will, their own legal protections, their own, in a sense, licenses to defend themselves, their rights to defend themselves from rabid, crazy, homosexual, drunk, CPS workers or sheriff deputies or anyone else that comes in to take your property or take your children or break up your marriage or arrest you for some as we're seeing in Britain. They're banging on doors and windows for people who share tweets or Facebook posts condemning the slaughter of children. It just seems like the righteous are being forced to migrate all of their legal lawful paperwork and documents and work out of the state, out of these systems, into something new. And they're having to build from the ground up, build from the common law, from the biblical law, from the natural law. But they seem to be gravitating to forming their own communities, and they have to, because the state, the federal government, the state government, it just seems on a trajectory of complete annihilation. And as you said, if when the dollar collapses, then what do you have? You have a sense of anarchy, in a sense. You have this inevitability. And I don't know exactly when it's going to come, but we seem to be going closer and closer. And I'll say this: the election in November, I still think is not going to occur. Anyone that thinks we're going to go as calmly into a pristine election process with bumps and debate and all that other stuff, I think is sorely mistaken. I think we're going to have some tragic events, false flag events. Some major disruptions have got to come, and it could include war with Russia, war with Iran, setting off all sorts of events. But whatever happens, I think it's going to be designed to disrupt this country, designed to disrupt America, to create these conditions of clampdown, civil war, and a resurgence of this COVID-19 monkeypox genetic lockdown.
Yeah, now that's coming. Fauci is recommending the mask again today. So I'm preparing my balaclava in case I need to do any banking. And I also, of course, have my, medieval plague mask that I want to wear on airplanes. And, possibly an alien mask. If I can get the alien mask, I want to wear that. I've got some pretty good masks that I'm really looking forward to sporting in the right occasions, right? With this stupid mask mandate, which is just absolutely patently ridiculous. And I can tell you that where I live, the mask is already being rejected. In fact, the local public press, Freifogel is his name, Josh Freifogel. He wrote a poem about it. And he said, a woman came to me and said, "Where's your mask?" And I said, well, that has a question that I want to ask. Why are you talking and putting all your germs out? Far better for you to keep your mouth shut. Right. And, and this was on the editorial page of the paper. Like, you might as well shut your mouth. You're not going to tell people in this jurisdiction to wear a mask. Okay. It's already bad enough that we have to wear, all kinds of headgear in the winter, including ski masks and snow hats and everything else you can imagine to try to get around, let alone somebody else trying to tell you something stupid, that a piece of paper is going to effectively stop the transmission of a virus. When it says on the box, will not stop the transmission of a virus, you have a better chance keeping mosquitoes out with a chain link fence than you do stopping a virus with that stupid mask. And that idiot, that criminal who has not been put in prison yet, Anthony Fauci, is coming out and say it's mask time again. No, it isn't mask time again. How about you guys shouldn't have done that stupid thing at all? But you're right, Scott. And I'll tell you, when I looked at it today, we were in class today talking about some scriptures on the Gospels. And we were also talking about the collapse of Solomon's empire. Now, David unified the tribes, and Solomon held it during his lifetime. And after that, it broke apart. It broke apart. And it broke apart because of what? Because of Solomon's infidelity. It began with sexual infidelity, with marital infidelity, 700 wives and 300 concubines. Come on. It began with marital infidelity, and then it went from marital infidelity to spiritual infidelity. And when it got to, and this is the case in our country, we go from marital infidelity to political infidelity. And once you hit political infidelity, this happened during the Clinton years. because we accepted, we were willing to turn a blind eye to the serial adultery of our leaders, then they were able to have adulterous relationships with other nations, like China, for instance, where Bill Clinton was selling off all of our top secrets to China using, Ron Brown to deliver this stuff into China, coming back with the money from the Chinese Communist government for our top secrets. Our MIRV missiles, our rocket systems, our satellite stuff. All that stuff was housed at Roswell and New Mexico and all this other stuff. And he was given complete access, giving this stuff away to China, selling it. He was looting American secrets, American government secrets that we'd spent tax money to create, selling it to China and putting it in his own pocket. And so Ron Brown would run the money back to the States, and then Vince Foster would ship it off to their numbered bank account in Switzerland. And then both of them were conveniently murdered. Ron Brown was found with a 45 round in the back of his head, and Vince Foster was shot with an assassin's gun, the bullet just enough to go through his skull, but not come back out on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
They claimed it was suicide. He was shot on the right side of his head. He was left-handed, right? Both of them were murdered.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this kind of, you get into political infidelity, and what happens? As soon as you get into political infidelity, the looters begin to loot.
Mm-hmm.
And so the looters, Bill Clinton be the first looter through the door. He's the one that caved in the glass of the retail establishment and started busting into the jewelry cases. And once he did it, everybody followed him.
Mm-hmm.
And then they realized they could weaponize the judiciary, they could weaponize the courts. And this was going on. And so there was loot. And so then you get to the Bush administration. Now it's the military industrial complex's opportunity to loot the nation. It was Franklin Delano Raines who was running, Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and they began to loot the real estate market.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this stuff was loot until 2008, the bill came due. And so what they do, print more money. Well, what happened with the TARP fund? Well, the last of it was sequestered by Barack Obama that he tried to smuggle into a Swiss bank account and got caught at the border with bearer bonds out of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at these guys and they said, hey, what are you guys doing trying to smuggle $132.4 billion over the Italian-Swiss border at Lugano? You think we've never seen a false bottom on a suitcase before? You think we're stupid? This is the smuggling capital of the world. How stupid do you think we are? But listen, you can smuggle it if you want, but guess what? We take 40%. That's going to run you $55 billion. So all of a sudden, backdoor deals were made. Barack Obama's like, hey, wait a minute, don't take my $55 billion. So the Pope enters in and says, well, look, if you don't want us to take your $55 billion, why are you putting that money in a Swiss bank account? You can put it here at the Vatican. Nobody ever audits the Vatican banks, ever. Put your money here in the Vatican bank. Oh, okay. Well, what's it going to cost me? Well, we want fiat in the United States. We want all of the market to anything that Chrysler owned. We want fiat in the United States, and we want 20 billion besides. Okay, so I'll give you $35 billion worth of Chrysler and 20 billion of US tax money. There you got your 55 billion. Then Barack Obama takes that 132.4 billion and divvies it out among all the key players in the judiciary and in the Senate and in the House. Gee, all of these congressmen get a call. Hey, you got $100 million in a Cayman bank account. I do. Let me fly down there and take a look at it. If you touch it, we're going public that you took $100 million bribe.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it, if you go to the Caymans and look at your account, we're going public that you took $100 million bribe. But when you get out of office, you're going to find $100 million sitting there. Oh, okay. All of a sudden, nobody in Congress is interested in whether or not Barack Obama can establish his American citizenship. No judge anywhere in the country is interested in whether or not Barack Obama can establish his American citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And the looting continues.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you get to Joe Biden, you get in your face, we're going to rip this place off until there's not one scrap of meat left on any bone. And we might boil the bones in water before we're done. Mm-hmm. This is nonstop in your face looting of the country. And causing a company to go DEI so you can crash its stock is just another form of looting. But this whole thing in Ukraine, 200 billion, goes into Ukraine, so it can all come in the back door to these guys, right? It's looting. Okay, here's all this American military machinery we spent your tax dollars creating. We've got all this military machinery. This is our backup. This is our deterrence. This keeps other countries from invading us. But why don't we resell that to Ukraine? Well, that's a good idea. Okay, so ship over these Abrams, charge them, full retail price. And of course, the money's never going to see them. We'll just authorize it out of Congress. They'll pay full retail price for a tank that's really on its last leg. And then that money comes, it doesn't go to anybody in Ukraine. It just goes to us. We just buy it back from the military contractor a second time. Wait a minute, didn't we already buy this once? Don't let that bother you. We got to change the title here. Okay? Now, while we're talking about this looting, I want to talk to you about an idea that Kamala Harris, the Kamal Anuj, proposed today. She's talking about putting taxes on unrealized income.
Right.
Okay. Now, I want to show you what this means. Okay. Let's say you live in the state of Washington. Okay. And you bought a house in 2002 and you paid $200,000 for that house and you're still living there. And that house is now valued at $820,000. Same piece of junk, 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, but it's now got a value of $820,000 because of the real estate collusion that's been going on between bankers, appraisers, and the hedge funds that are buying all this real estate, causing everybody to be homeless.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Kamala Harris wants to come to you and say, well, you've got $620,000 in unrealized income. We want 41% of that right now. Now, the 16th Amendment does not allow her to tax unrealized income. It has to be realized. You have to have recognized gains. Recognized gains don't happen until you sell a transaction. Not unrecognized gains, not unrealized gains. It has to be recognized before it can be taxed. She wants to tax it before it's recognized. So what do you think is going to happen to all the homeowners who've been sitting on a house that they bought for $200,000 that's now valued at $600,000 or $800,000 or whatever? They're going to be forced to sell their home. That's what's going to happen. They're going to be forced to sell so that they can reap this windfall profit out of all the upscale valuation on all this real estate, because they intend to loot this price fixing scheme that's been going into the real estate, which was used to claim that we still had a meaningful GDP. How do we have a GDP that they still claim is worth 17 trillion bucks? Because we valued the real estate up well beyond its actual value, 4 times its actual value, because there is no economy. There's no manufacturing. There's no industry. There is no economy. And because there is no economy, the only way you get there is by artificially pricing this market. This is what they've done in a real estate price fixing scam that's completely illegal. But who's going to stop them, right? And now Harris has come up with this idea. Oh, well, let's just reap all of that profit. We'll reap all of that price fixing. We'll impose that on the homeowner, force them into a sale. And then who do you think is going to do the buying? The hedge fund. The hedge fund's going to buy your property. And then where are you going to live with what's left of your unrealized income? Single wide trailer. That's where you're going to live, right? A tiny house, maybe. Or if you can't afford it, if the tax is too high because you didn't have any equity in your home, well, then guess what? You'll be down there looking for fentanyl. So this is the kind of condition that we're in. And this kind of condition, and the point I was making about Solomon, when you look at Solomon's kingdom, when it fell apart, the northern kingdom broke off from the southern kingdom. Solomon was given only one tribe. Only the tribe of Yehuda would remain in order to honor David and Jerusalem. The other tribes are gone. Well, what happened to those other tribes? Well, they splattered. They got taken into captivity in 722 BC. They were dispersed all over the earth. They splattered. Now, that same splatter happened in the Catholic Church. When you look at the creation of the Christian church in 325 AD, the Nicene Council that created the church. Church was one body. Western Europe, Eastern Europe, one body, one church. They had 7 Constantinian councils that solidified how the church was going to run. Thereafter, Rome had 21 of its own councils. Well, we're going to do it different because we're Rome. And in 1016, the Great Schism happened. Rome was carved off. The West was carved off from the East. And what happened after the West carved off from the East? Now there's 46,000 denominations. That's not a breakup. That's the windshield hitting the pavement and breaking into 46,000 pieces. The same fate awaits America.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Zhirinovsky predicted there'd be 9 or 10 nations that would form out of America. I don't think that's going to be the case. It may be the case 70 years from now, but when this thing splatters, it's going to go to city states.
Yes.
And that's it. It's going to be city states, and they're going to be walled. The ones that are successful are going to be walled. The ones that are not walled are going to be continually raided, continually burned to the ground, their children and their women stolen, raped, and killed, and the men all slaughtered, and all of their goods taken. So, you know, it's going to break into that many pieces. It's going to break into thousands and thousands of pieces. So in your community, you need to figure out where you're going to build your wall, how high you're going to build it, and who's going to help, and what you're going to build it from. Remember, if you build it from wood, somebody can burn it. If you build it from stone, it's a lot stronger than brick.
Yeah.
Brick can be broken with a stone, right? And fired from a trebuchet or a catapult. Rock, on the other hand, look at it. Go look at the castles that weathered World War II.
Yeah.
Stone, right? Bullets ricochet off stone.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this is something. So this is why I'm saying to you, Scott, when we look at the whole overall protocol, we look at where it's going. Now, Russia is saying, well, look, if you're a conservative, come to Russia. Now, let me just couch this and say anybody who's considering that. First of all, you get a 3-month visa. And in that 3-month visa, you don't have to prove that you can speak Russian and you don't have to know Russian history. But you do have to apply for a 3-year visa that puts you on that protocol. And 3 years from that 3 months, you're going to have to pass a Russian fluency test, and you're going to have to pass a Russian history test. And that Russian history test, by the way, is loaded up with every single day of the calendar that had any meaning during the time of the Bolsheviks. You need to know all of those dates. The dates of the czars, and Nicholas the First and Alexander the Third and blah blah. Maybe you need to know those. Maybe you don't. The Romanov dynasty, Peter the Great, Catherine the Great. Whatever the situation may be. But the immediate history from the Bolsheviks forward, you need to know. So this is going to put you on a 3. If you do not have a proclivity for languages, forget it. You're not going there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because you'll be there for 3 years and 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll be on a ticket out of there. And that may be as long as you want to be there, right? That may be as long as you want to be there. But we can see now that Russia is succeeding wildly. They're succeeding wildly. Now, I got to tell you, Scott, between me and you, and I know there's a lot of Russian listeners to this program, and allow me to say to them, здравствуйте, здравствуйте, как дела? Очень хорошо вас видеть снова. It's good to see you again, all of you Russian listeners who are watching. The Russian embrace of culture right now is an embrace that is still in motion.
Yes.
It is not something that has settled and said, this is the long flow of our culture. And it is still subject to the influence of radical feminism, still subject to the influence of the LGBT agenda, even though it's criminalized right now. We had a Defense of Marriage Act in this country that was completely aborted by Barack Obama.
Yeah.
So, you're not wholly protected in your conservatism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the truth is that, and a lot of this has to do with some of the holes in orthodoxy, of which I happen to be a bit of a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to say that to people who are thinking about this, there's a lot of people that left the Soviet Union to come to the United States for freedom that are now facing a communist dictatorship. And they're asking themselves the question, why did I leave again?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what was my thinking again? Why did I leave again?
Well, look, and let's just flash for a little quick side note. This is precisely the predicament of Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram, who left Russia because he didn't want to engage the Russian authorities, who were putting out some suggestions or wanting some access to Telegram. He left. He moved to the United Arab Emirates. He also claimed French citizenship. And then he's been approached by the FBI. He's been approached by other intelligence agencies in the West. And because he's refused to give them any of the same kind of information, he was arrested on the airport tarmac, and he is now sitting in a jail cell. And they're charging him with, well, a web platform that has pornography on it, or that has terrorism on it, or all sort. And he's not complied with giving the authorities whatever they want. Turning over everything from Telegram to the French intelligence or the CIA intelligence. So now he I think he's thinking, why did I seek French citizenship? Why did I leave Russia? They never prosecuted, but here I'm in France, I'm in the West, and I'm in a jail cell.
Yeah, and I can tell you that I think there is more to that than what meets the eye. For instance, I do believe that the intelligence agencies already have the back door to his encryption
Sure.
system. They've already got it. But I think what the deal is here is that Durov was blocking. They've got an upload they want to use to harvest. They've got some kind of an AI upload, and they
Yeah.
want to get that. They want to get that AI upload into Telegram so that they can harvest. They want to do a wholesale harvest. And I suspect that, given quantum computing at the level it is, they'll be able to harvest the entire thing. Even though there's a billion users on the platform, they'll be able to harvest the entire thing in a 24-hour period. They'll harvest everything, and then they'll put it through their AI scanners to profile Telegram users to determine, to profile you. Are you a red, a yellow, or who are you? And so because it's been an uncensored platform, now they want to reap the harvest. Now they're ready to reap the harvest to find out who's actually holding the views, because they can no longer do it on Facebook, because Facebook is obviously a CIA self-reporting site. And Zuckerberg hoarded himself out very early on, selling his profiles of those people to Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was a whore a long time ago. And Durov, and so the protocol is, I think, was this. Durov was blocking the AI access. He was actively blocking the AI access to Telegram. By arresting him, they got the access because he couldn't block it. They had him in custody, so they used that as an opportunity. So you saw during the time of his custody, both X and Telegram all of a sudden started performing differently. We've noticed a difference on Telegram. And I'm looking at Telegram right now, and it's got, well, update Telegram now. You update Telegram, so your Telegram platform has got our AI bot on it, tracking your every thought, every idea, every move, right?
Mhm.
And so this came out of, again, this is again AI processing that's coming directed by the three big corporatocracies out of Silicon Valley that are running the world according to their techno-fascist.
And I'll tell you, the Telegram that you download in the States will not allow you access to the RT Telegram. The Russia Today has a Telegram channel, and you can't access it if you download the US Google version or whatever. It tells you this channel is unavailable in your country, or it does not comply with the laws, or on and on and on.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. And this is something to think about too, because of course, anybody who participates in RT is now a foreign service agent, if you
Yeah.
for journalism, right? And of course, and again, all of this stuff is non-sustainable. And most of this stuff is action that we're seeing right now leading up to this election time. You're not going to see this in 2025. In 2025, it's going to be okay. Now we need to put out the fires that we started and clean up the kryptonite that's lying around on the street, right? And so, yeah, when you're talking about that now, Google Play in particular just got hit by a federal judge in California who said you are an illegal monopoly. Google Play is an illegal monopoly, and I'm telling you, the kind of protocols we had to go through to get our app running on Google Play. We had to completely restructure. Ours is a scriptural app, right? We're not talking about any political anything. We just have scripture on there, an interactive scriptural app, the Sefer app. And, but we had to restructure that app from the top to the bottom in order to meet the new protocols of Google Play, right? And so this judge said, that kind of nonsense is a bunch of baloney. You guys are an illegal monopoly because there is nobody else who can access Android devices.
Yeah.
If you want an app on an Android device, you have to go through Google Play, or it does not function on the Android device.
Mhm.
So I think that the fact that this federal judge has made this determination and has said, look, that's an illegal monopoly in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, as is most of Apple protocol, right?
Mhm.
And other protocols, also illegal monopolies, which Europe is about ready to sanction the daylights out of everybody for this kind of stuff. They've hit some of these large providers with monopolistic practices and be hit them with huge fines, right?
Mhm.
But nonetheless, I think that what is going to happen now is that people are going to have, of course, with the internet outages, and this is the great irony of it, this techno-fascist dream that's coming out of the corporatocracy is one thing. Being able to sustain the electric grid and the cell phone system, and the internet system is another thing. That requires a skill, that requires an in the field skill set that has somebody that knows how to climb a pole and splice a wire, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
That's what that requires. And there's nobody doing that anymore. Nobody.
Mhm.
So we were on the verge of a very huge grid collapse, and they're not going to be able to sustain their techno-fascist dreams because they're not going to be able to keep the batteries recharged.
Yeah.
So these are some of the problems, and I'm glad these guys don't think about it, right? I'm glad these corporate execs don't think about that stuff. They only think about whether or not their Tesla is charged. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Right. And so as a consequence, we're going to see this whole thing play out in a very different way. Now, one guy put it, and he put it very well. The true one world government is going to be under Messiah.
Mm.
It is not going to be under some antichrist. It's not going to be under some self-appointed guru. It's not going to be under somebody who thinks he's the Messiah or anybody else. It's going to be the Messiah. That's the only world government that's ever going to appear.
Mhm.
And all of the evil machinations of mankind are going to come back to destroy everything they have touched with their evil.
Yeah.
This stuff is self-destructive. That's what they don't understand. They
Yeah.
put a protocol in place thinking that they're like I'll give you an example. Going back to the destruction of the kingdom of Solomon. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, he takes over, and the guys who are getting ready to start a civil war come to him and say, hey, look, we're willing to stay in this kingdom and we're willing to serve you, but you got to give us a tax break. Your yoke is too heavy. Your burden is too burdensome. It's too much. You got to give us a break. And Rehoboam says to them, well, let me think about it for 3 days. Okay, come back and see me in 3 days. I'll give you an answer. So he goes to his older advisors, the guy that worked for Solomon. He said, what do you think? And they said, well, if you lower the taxes and show them you care about them, they'll come alongside you and be loyal to you forever. Advice that should have been given to Nicholas II prior to the Bolshevik Revolution before he called the Cossacks out to murder all those peasants in the square.
Yeah.
Right? If you just care about them, show you care about them and roll the taxes back, they'll be there forever. Then he goes to the young bucks. You don't have to take that crap from them. You tell them that the yoke that Solomon put on them was a little finger compared to what you're going to put onto them. And where he was going to chastise you with a whip, you're going to chastise them with scorpions. So that's exactly what Rehoboam told them. And then civil war broke out. And then he got stuck with only one tribe, the tribe of Judah and Jerusalem, and everybody else was gone. And they said to him, what inheritance do we have with you? What in common do we have with you? And this is the question that America has to ask its federal government right now.
That's
What do
right.
we have in common with you? You don't represent us. You don't
No.
listen to us. You don't care about us. You're not elected by us. You're not chosen by us. You don't
No.
seek our consent when it comes to the laws. You just impose and impose and impose, and you could care less whether it's Americans, Canadians, Venezuelans, Pakistanis, whoever it might be, that's at the receiving end of your looting and parasitical power structure. So Americans look at this and need to say, what inheritance do we have with you? We have nothing in common with you. We have nothing in common. You guys don't believe in mom and apple pie and baseball. You believe in something else. You believe in pizza.
Yeah.
Eh?
Stephen, I think we're exactly at that level. We're approaching that where the American people are going to be saying, what do we have in common with you? Nothing. We don't have anything in common with Kamala Harris. We don't have anything in common with this transgender, lunatic, climate change, lie and false religion. And I think people are going to divorce themselves. And it's going to be very, I think it'll be a small percentage who have the balls to pick up and actually do it. And then there'll be followers who will follow those men with balls and character. But you'll have a lot of COVID-19 over-vaccinated drones and zombies that will just be remaining, looking up at the sky, looking down, not knowing which way to go, right or left, because they have sold their souls for the 30 pieces of silver and the vaccinations and the promises that have been complete lies. They've idolatrized or made an idol the federal government, their social security, I'm just going to bury my talent in the sand. That's what so many Americans have done in the name of peace, when there is no peace, and in the name of prosperity, in the name of I don't want to lose anything, so I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to be, it's hunkered down. I think there's so many in this country that are in that mindset, and I think there's going to be a great divorce, a great disgust, and a great divorce, and a great expression of contempt and shunning of those people by the righteous, by the bold. The righteous are as bold as a lion, and they're going to be very quickly, I think, shedding off those old rags, which were the American government, the American spirit, the American flag. They're nothing but rags at this point. They're not what they were 100 years ago or 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. They have, as you said, they've been looted, they've been bled, they've been tattered and torn, and you have to recognize that. And it's to every season under heaven there is a time, and I think that time is coming. We're running out of time, Stephen. I want to give you the last few minutes to give us your closing thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I agree with that, Scott. I mean, we're at a point now where every little step you take is a step that needs to be furtherance of that divorce and separation. And you do it incrementally, you do it small, you do it very, very small. But what little steps you can take, pretty soon, starts out an inch, pretty soon you're a mile away, pretty soon you're 100 miles away, pretty soon you're out and nobody remembers your name. And this is something to give some very serious consideration to, that when we talk about this divorce from the country.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially the government becomes irrelevant to the point that it's representing, the way it stands right now, the federal government represents an entity that is the most indebted entity in the history of mankind, owes the world more money than anybody else that's ever been seen, and is about to collapse on itself. And so why do you need to be loyal to that? Why do you need to be part of that? Why do you need to be even recommending that? Better off to say, I'm not doing that. And to separate yourself bit by bit, become your own person and step away. And the more independent you can become is the better off you're going to be. Remember what Janis Joplin once said: freedom's just another name for nothing left to lose.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the line of that, we had worked with some paralegal people that were developing that affidavit idea, and I just wanted to read this. And if people want to get it, we'll put it up. But I think this is the start of divorcing yourself. From what I think is going to be another coup d'état in this country with Kamala Harris, who is not natural born. And this is just a document that we've been working on, an attestation of affidavit. And you put your name in there, do hereby state, swear, and affirm that Kamala Harris is not qualified to assume or become a president of the United States pursuant to the Constitution of the United States, which states the natural born citizen only is so qualified. Kamala is not a natural born citizen. Therefore, I am hereby demanding that the sheriff, the supervisors, and the county's authorities all affirm that. that the constitutional requirements for the presidency are not met in Kamala Harris. She is not a natural born citizen. Therefore, Kamala Harris is not qualified to assume the presidency. Note, if you do not sign this affidavit, you are siding with an unqualified person. That will be considered an act of treason, and you are immediately unqualified to hold any position in the county of Alameda, whatever your county is, submitted with respect for the U.S. Constitution, the laws of the United States in this county on this date. And it cites Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5. No person except a natural born citizen shall be eligible to the office of the president. Steve, I'll get your closing thoughts on that.
Yeah, excellent. And you might, I mean, she is a native-born citizen under the seminal case Wong Kim Ark. That is to say, she's the subject of naturalization under the 14th Amendment, assuming she has exercised that right after coming into the United States by some evidence that she has sworn an oath to the United States. I haven't yet seen that either. So she may not yet be a native-born citizen. She may be somebody with a native-born citizen option that has not yet exercised that option. And so the long and the short of it is, Scott, is that we're in a new world now. We're entering into a new paradigm.
Yeah.
And it literally is going to be every man for himself. And in this respect, I just want to encourage people, there is a standard of righteousness you can follow. Let your yea be your yea and your nay be your nay. Be a person who is of the repute of your name, right? Let your name be your standard. Let Yah's name be upon you and your name be your standard. That when someone speaks your name, they speak of a person of integrity whose yea is their yea and whose nay is their nay. You be that kind of a person. Be a person who is structuring his family in accord with the idea that the family is going to stick together as well as they can, and that the idea is to hold yourself until you get married and stay married and raise your children to understand the same thing, that we can rebuild something. We start by rebuilding our family, we rebuild our community, then we rebuild the area around our community. We join with other communities that are similarly well built, and we begin to structure a new nation. But there will be no new nation unless we leave behind the decadence that we have been following since the turn of the century, since 9/11. We have to come away from this, come out of Babylon, lest you share in her plagues. And now is the time, because there ain't any other time left. We do it now, or we don't get a chance to do it.
Stephen Pidgeon, always good to have you on. Thank you for joining us on Global Great Awakenings. Thank you, our producer Tong, for helping us as well. We appreciate you. We encourage people, if you are interested in the affidavit and these sort of declarations of independence and moving in this general direction, email us, go to our Rumble channel, greatawakeningstv.com, and we will be happy to provide you. We will see you next week. God bless you. Good night.